Welcome into another episode of Locked On Phillies. In today's episode, should the Phillies trade for more starting pitching this offseason? It's definitely a conversation, and I'll tell you why.
You are Locked On Phillies, your daily Philadelphia Phillies podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, this is Locked On Phillies. I'm your host, Connor Thomas. Thank you so much for joining us today. We come to you as part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. You may know me from some of my other work in the sports talk space here in Philadelphia. I've been on the radio, 97.5 The Fanatic, for 5 years talking Philly sports, all the big teams. I've also been a credentialed Philadelphia Phillies media member for 3 years, and this is my third season as the host of Locked On Phillies. Please make sure that you're rating and reviewing if you're listening to us in podcast form today. Leave that rating. Appreciate that. And if you're watching on YouTube or if you want to check us out on YouTube, make sure you hit that subscribe button. It'll get you notifications when new episodes are posted. Super easy. It's free to do. And it's also a really, really big help to me and to everyone who works on Locked On Phillies. So appreciate that very, very much. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONMLB, and you'll get $20 off your first purchase. So go ahead and check out our friends over at Game Time. Now, it's going to be a very interesting conversation here to start the episode. Should the Phillies trade for more starting pitching? They had one of the best rotations in all of baseball this year. So why would they need more? Well, we're going to break that down in a second. We're also going to evaluate Orion Kerkering's 2024 season as we continue with our bullpen evaluations. And speaking of the pitching staff, well, there was a loss for the pitching side of the coaching staff this week for the Philadelphia Phillies, and something that people should be aware of, just to give credit to this guy and what he's done for the Phillies organization. So we'll talk about that a little bit later on in the episode. But let's start with the big topic, which is, should the Phillies acquire more starting pitching? And I said trade. It could be a trade. It could be a free agency signing. But it seems like the more likely way to acquire pitching would be through the trade way. If you're going to get somebody that has a higher profile, right? If you're going to just get a fifth starter and you're going to bring somebody in to fill that gap and split time with like Andrew Painter. We talked in yesterday's episode about Andrew Painter and winning the Arizona Fall League Pitcher of the Year award. He could be ready for the 2025 season in some capacity with an innings limit. You could sign somebody and do that. But if you're looking to go out and get somebody that could be part of this rotation for a longer term, or a higher profile guy that could be there for this year, that's definitely something that would be interesting for the Philadelphia Phillies. And there's a couple of factors as to why. First of all, you have a high-profile trade chip that you've already made known is available. Alec Bohm, still on the trade block. Now, I don't think the Phillies are like dying to get rid of Alec Bohm, but shopping him, I mean, if they get a good return for a guy that they seem comfortable with moving on from, they're going to be willing to move Alec Bohm. And he's an all-star caliber, arbitration-eligible 28-year-old player, right? We've said that multiple times whenever those Alec Bohm trade discussions get brought up. But here's where it's interesting. So there's something from FanSided where they talked about Logan Gilbert potentially being available from the Seattle Mariners, who threw the most innings in all of Major League Baseball last year. And while I don't know that that's realistic, and I don't know it's the best move because his contract's up after this year, it would essentially be trading Bohm for a one-year rental. Maybe that works for a guy that was an all-star in Gilbert and pitched the most innings in the majors. Like, that's a high-caliber guy. You get him in here for 1 year and you say, hey, we're going to go try and win the World Series, and then we'll figure out the contingency plan for that after the 2025 season. That makes sense. Like, I do understand it from that perspective, but it's not so much just the Logan Gilbert conversation. It's the should the Philadelphia Phillies acquire starting pitching conversation. Why, again, I told you why a trade seems more reasonable, because you have the big trade chip in Alec Bohm that you want to use. And some people have talked about Devin Williams as a relief pitcher as potentially return. But let's look at the rotation for the Philadelphia Phillies and just break this down. What they're going to need to do over the next, you got to kind of look at it as 2 seasons, right? And part of the reason you have to look at it as 2 seasons is one of your big guys is not locked down past this year. And also because Andrew Painter in 2 years is probably going to be a mainstay in the rotation once you get him off the innings limit that he's going to most likely be on for 2025. So this is projecting out a couple years, but think about it this way. So Wheeler's locked down. Nola's locked down. You just locked down Sanchez with a long-term extension this past season. Taijuan Walker probably not going to be with the team, so you got that fifth spot in the rotation open. But that third or fourth spot, wherever you slot in Ranger Suarez, is a question mark. I don't think Ranger Suarez is going to be traded this offseason because I just don't think he will be. I think the Phillies would rather keep him and get what you're going to get out of him this year with high upside than trade him and have all these moving pieces and everything like that. Like, while they are open to changing some things, they are a team that has shown you that continuity is comfortable. Continuity, they believe, breeds success. And in the regular season, they've been right. And in the postseason, they have been incorrect to the extent that we'd like them to be, right? You could say, oh, well, NLCS just a year ago, an NLCS appearance. Cool. But a lot of the fan base would say you just went out to the Mets. You're heading backwards. What is going on with this team? So there are upsides and downsides to continuity and running it back, as it's been termed. But there are some things that the Phillies would like to see change, where there's some optionality that they have. And part of that comes from the decision to start shopping Alec Bohm. If you believe Ranger Suarez is not going to sign a long-term extension with this team, and it would seem like that's not likely right now, simply because they didn't do it this past year. They did Sanchez first. And there haven't been talks about signing Ranger Suarez to a long-term extension so far this offseason, even though it's still relatively early. It seems like, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, they're going to let Ranger Suarez get to free agency, or they're going to trade him. I see it more likely they keep him with the team. But that means you got 1 year of Ranger Suarez. And if you have 1 year of Ranger Suarez, do you want to go acquire a starting pitcher while you're trading an all-star caliber guy in Alec Bohm that could be here, that could lock up maybe the fifth spot, maybe the fourth spot in the rotation and get somebody that's long-term? And what that could do, right, for this year is you could get a high-caliber guy to make your rotation just super overpowered, right? It could be Wheeler, Nola, Suarez, Sanchez, whoever this fifth guy is that could potentially be as good as a third starter in some rotations. And you bring that guy in and you say, okay, we got a monster rotation this year. And then when Ranger Suarez is gone, that guy slots up to his spot. That's why the Logan Gilbert thing doesn't really make sense to me unless you move Ranger Suarez this offseason, because you're going to have 2/5 of your rotation on a 1-year deal at least. And then who knows what your fifth guy is? Another free agent signing? Or is it, God forbid, Taijuan Walker? Or is it Andrew Painter on an innings restriction and you have to work some stuff out partway through the season? Like, that doesn't seem reliable. So I think that while people look at this rotation as a strength of the Philadelphia Phillies team, it would be smart for Dave Dombrowski and Sam Fuld and now Preston Mattingly, who stepped into a higher role in the front office, to explore the options of bringing in a new starting pitcher, not just for that fifth spot in the rotation to replace Taijuan Walker, but to legit be here longer term than what you could see Ranger Suarez being here for. It's not a move on from Ranger Suarez, but it's a, hey, better find your next option. And I think, well, you've got to find two, because the fifth spot in your rotation is currently unoccupied. So you've got one known empty spot and another one that's probably going to be empty in a year. And it's kind of just like, well, right, you want to pay your bills when you have the money. You don't want to end up getting to the end of the month and the rent check comes due and you're like, well, man, I don't have anything right now, so I'm going to have to barely scrape by. I'm going to be eating a cup of noodles from the next week. No, the Phillies have a great trade piece in Alec Bohm if they want to move him, and it seems like they do. So maybe now's the time to go ahead and bolster that rotation, because we know that in the postseason, pitching is what makes the biggest difference. We get so caught up on the offense and them not creating run-scoring opportunities and the slumps that the Phillies have been in offensively the past couple postseasons. But at the end of the day, great pitching is the way that you find yourself in a World Series and winning a World Series. So I don't hate the idea. And honestly, I hadn't really thought about needing to add to the rotation, but when you break it down that way, it feels a little bit more volatile where the Philadelphia Phillies rotation stands right now. The only three guys you can count on being here longer than this year right now are Nola, Sanchez, Wheeler. It's a pretty darn good three guys to have, but Andrew Painter is still a coin flip, as much as I think he's incredibly talented. We got to see how he adjusts to Major League Baseball, if he indeed does get a shot this year, which I believe he will, but in what capacity that is, and how good does he look, and how much can you count on him for future seasons? Like, all of this stuff is up in the air. So to keep the contention window alive, you want to extend that out with longer contracted guys, and maybe this is the time for the Philadelphia Phillies to add to the starting rotation. So I would not be surprised to see the Philadelphia Phillies make an acquisition for a guy that is under contract for multiple years, or sign a starter that is a little bit more high profile than you'd expect them to add for just a fifth spot in the rotation this offseason. It seems to make sense. Shout out to the folks at Fansided for putting together that article that prompted my brain wheels to start turning. And let me know what you think if you would add to the rotation based on those factors that I just laid out for you there, because to me, it seems to make a heck of a lot of sense. And it was something that I didn't really think of for a plan for this offseason until really today when I read that article. So go ahead and let me know. Coming up next, we're going to talk about Orion Kerkering's 2024 season. We're continuing our evaluation. He had a darn good year. Kind of an under-the-radar darn good year because you had two All-Stars in Matt Strahm and Jeff Hoffman, who we've evaluated already. You can go back and watch those episodes. But what did the young stud do in 2024, and how projectable is it that he can continue to work his way into elite territory MLB relieving? But we'll talk about it as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But first, we got to talk about Game Time because they got some great stuff going on. I mean, Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play even easier when you want to go see them live. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats. You don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. You want it to be quick. At Game Time, the prices actually go down the closer you get to first pitch, tip-off, kickoff, puck drop. So if you're doing it last minute, you don't want to have to wade through millions and millions of tickets. No, Game Time Picks, key to curate everything right to the way that you want it so you can find the best tickets, not just for sports, but for concerts, comedy, theater, everything that Game Time has tickets to. Plus, they've got all the other great features that you know and love about Game Time. They've got the all-in pricing, which means you toggle that feature. It shows you the total up front, no surprise fees at checkout. You get a panoramic view from your seats before you purchase. The lowest price guarantee means you find seats in the same row and section for less. Game Time will give you 110% of the difference, and your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry with Game Time ticketing coverage. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and make sure you use code LOCKEDONMLB. You'll get $20 off your first purchase. Terms to apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONMLB for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, so Orion Kerkering had a very interesting year in 2024 that I don't think a lot of people talked about because the bullpen was really in a spot where they had these high leverage guys in Strahm and Hoffman that were having incredible years, like really, really good all-star caliber seasons, the best years of those two guys' career. And they took a lot of the focus away from what Orion Kerkering did, which was have a very, very strong year. It was only his first full season in the majors. Remember, in 2023, this dude made it from low A ball to major league ball, pitching in the NLCS against the Arizona Diamondbacks. Like, that's a meteoric rise for the guy named after a star. But you got to now have staying power. And Orion Kerkering in 2024, well, he showed he's going to have staying power. It wasn't just nice story, this guy made it up. No, he's legitimately a major league reliever. Listen to some of these numbers from 2024. Over 63 innings pitched. He had a 2.29 ERA. That's remarkable. We were talking about Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm's numbers. Kerkering was not too far off from that. Now, he gave up 51 hits in those 63 innings, so less than a hit an inning. Pretty solid to see, 16 earned runs. He only gave up 2 homers. That is the most impressive stat for Orion Kerkering. Like, we knew he was going to have strikeout numbers. He had 74. He's got that great slider. He's got plus velocity. The walks, 17. You'd like to see him get that down a little bit, but they're not crazy numbers, which is why his whip was 1.079. You have that right around 1. You're going to be pretty darn good at the major league level. But, man, 2 home runs allowed in 63 innings pitched at a ballpark like Citizens Bank Park, having that as your home field, like, can't say enough good things about the guy. He is absolutely incredible for where he should be at this point in his career. I mean, the guy's 23 years old. Now he's going to turn 24 here right about as the season gets going for the Philadelphia Phillies. His birthday's April 4th, so just at the start of the season. But this is a guy that he's arbitration eligible through 2027. He will not be a free agent until 2030. That's when he's going to get he becomes arbitration eligible, I should say, in 2027. He's not going to be a free agent until 2030. That's when his service time gets to the point where he can be a free agent. So you've got 25, 6, 7, 8, 9, 30. 6 more years of Orion Kerkering. Yeah, that sounds pretty darn good to the Philadelphia Phillies. And relievers are not guys that you really like lock down to those long-term contracts this early. I wouldn't expect them to sign a guy out who has that many years of team control. So we're not talking like, does Orion Kerkering get an extension this offseason? No, but what could this guy be? Could he be an all-star? Yes. Could he be one of the best relievers in baseball? Yes. Does he still have a much higher ceiling than what he's even shown so far? Absolutely. I mean, there were moments where Orion Kerkering still looked unpolished, right? The control, and we talked about the 17 walks, the control looked to be missing at times out there on the mound. And the confidence, well, it's not to the level of a Jeff Hoffman or a Matt Strahm, guys that have had long Major League Baseball careers, and that's natural. I'm not faulting him for that, but I'm just saying, like, these are the factors that have to make you feel good about Orion Kerkering. Now, he's a guy, because of the Philadelphia Phillies postseason success, he's a guy that's garnered a little bit of national attention. Like, that's a name that if you're a true baseball fan, and you're not necessarily a fan of the Phillies, but you follow the postseason, you probably know the name. You're like, Orion Kerkering, oh yeah, he's that guy that throws for the Phillies. That's like the level of recognition. For guys like Jeff Hoffman and Matt Strahm and Carlos Estevez, they're guys where it's like, oh yeah, those are really, really good relievers. I think Orion Kerkering's ceiling is like elite, elite, elite. This guy could be so darn good. Now, maybe this is a conversation for years in the future because he won't be for the Philadelphia Phillies in 2025. Like, they're not going to make Orion Kerkering at 24 years of age the closer for this team. At least I don't think. And part of the reason is because teams just don't value closers the same way they used to. Closer is not always your number one reliever anymore. For some teams it is. For some teams, they'd rather have that guy be the setup guy or a variable guy that they can throw in the 7th or the 8th or the 9th to say, hey, sometimes the biggest inning is not the last one. Now, bunch of old heads that love baseball will say the last inning is always the biggest one if you're in a save situation. And I'm inclined to agree with that line of thinking, but I do like optionality with the bullpen to a certain extent, right? So I don't know what Orion Kerkering's future holds. I don't know where he slots into this bullpen. I don't know where the best spot for him is because, frankly, we've seen a year and a little bit of change of him at the major league level. And the fact that we've seen that, and he's already just lock low 2 ERA, I think that's amazing from Orion Kerkering. Like, of the young players on this major league roster, like the guys in that age group, the 20, not that they have 22-year-olds, but 22 to like even let's say 26, 27. And there's only a couple of guys in that range. The highest ceiling is Orion Kerkering, and we don't think of it all that much because, well, he's a reliever that throws every once in a while, not a guy that pitches every day, not a starting pitcher that's going to give you 7 innings. Like, I think his ceiling could be higher than Christopher Sanchez. I think his ceiling is higher than Yohan Rojas. Like, this is a guy that I look at and I say, this dude is a future back end of the bullpen star, and he's already not that far off from it right now. So his 2024 season, there were high expectations because of how quickly he rose through the Philadelphia Phillies system. But were they like near all-star expectations? I don't know that would have been fair, considering that in 2023, let me just pull up the numbers again with how many innings he pitched. He threw a total of 3 innings in 2023. He was a crapshoot in 2024. A great story, a lot of belief in this stuff, but he delivered insanely. So believe it or not, this is actually going to be the 3rd straight Philadelphia Phillies relief pitcher that I give an A+ for the 2024 season. And Kerkering's bar was lower than Hoffman and Strahm. You knew Hoffman and Strahm had to kind of be your guys after they established themselves as top-level relievers in 2023, or at least top-level relievers on this team. But the other thing you think about is you move Gregory Soto, you move Seranthony Dominguez, trade both of those guys. They both end up in Baltimore. Orion Kerkering gets thrust into the spotlight, and he didn't blink, he didn't falter, he didn't do any of that. He just stepped right into those roles that they put him in this year, and he delivered time and time and time again. And I think he had one of the most underrated great seasons of the 2024 Philadelphia Phillies. So I'm giving Orion Kerkering an A+ in his evaluation for 2024. Now, compared to his peers, which is unfair for a guy that is so young still, and it was just in his first full major league season. I'm going to go ahead and give him I'll give him a B+, right? When I start getting into the A- territory, I'm talking about all-star caliber guys. I'll give Orion Kerkering a B+. I think he's got a high ceiling for next year. I do wonder if, and you know what's funny? I don't know if it carries over to relief pitchers because they just don't throw as much. Starters and position players, you talk about the sophomore slump, right? You have the great rookie year, and then everybody figures you out after that kind of a little bit, and you have to adjust to how teams adjust to you. And the great ones, well, they plow through it, and the okay ones or the good ones, well, they take a bit to adjust, and then they can become great. I don't know if that carries over to relievers, so I wouldn't really expect Orion Kerkering to have a down year in 2025 just because it's his second full season at the major league level. We'll have to see. Could there be a little bit higher of a number, like a 2.5 ERA? Possible. 2.7 ERA? Possible. But I still think he's going to be sub 3, and that's remarkable. Do not take that for granted, how tough it is to do that, especially with the level of experience Orion Kerkering has. So we're learning a lot of things. I didn't really pay attention to the Phillies maybe needing to add a starter, and we talked about them probably having to do that or should look to do that this offseason. And I didn't really consider Orion Kerkering until I started going through the numbers to prep for this episode as one of the best Philadelphia Phillies players this season, but he really was. And he deserves a lot of credit for that. The Philadelphia Phillies truly have found a star in Orion Kerkering. Coming up next, we're going to talk about another unheralded part of the 2024 Phillies and the Phillies for a couple years now, and a guy that's no longer with the organization. The Philadelphia Phillies, they lost a darn good assistant pitching coach. We'll talk about what that could mean and give some credit to the guy that worked alongside Caleb Cotham for a couple years here in Philadelphia. Coming up next as we continue today's episode of Locked On Phillies. But let's talk about FanDuel first, because you got to be ready to tackle NFL action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $150 in bonus bets if you win. The FanDuel Sportsbook app gives you everything you need to place live bets on the NFL all in one place. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today, and you're going to get started with $150 in bonus bets if you win your first $5 bet. So what does that mean? Well, take that $5, put it on a heavy favorite. You don't have to win the money from the actual bet. You're going to get $150 in bonus bets if your bet wins. So if, let's say, for example, there's a football team that's like, I don't know, minus 15. Maybe you look at college football, minus 30, something like that. There's crazy lines in college football. Put 5 on it. Get $150 back if that bet wins. That's FanDuel.com. Never waste a hunch and make every moment more with FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL. All right, so there might be some of you out there who are big-time Phillies fans who don't even know the name Brian Kaplan. But Brian Kaplan has been a big part of the Phillies' success. This has been a theme as we talk about the bullpen, because part of the bullpen is finding guys to develop. You don't just have ace prospects and say, well, you're going to be our 7th inning guy. No, those guys are starters. Andrew Painter ain't throwing out of the pen, but you need to find and develop bullpen pitchers like an Orion Kerkering if you're going to truly have success as a baseball team. You saw from the Philadelphia Phillies NLDS matchup with the Mets, yeah, the bullpen can make a pretty large difference when it matters most for your baseball team. Your season can end or it can continue based on the merits of the bullpen. And Brian Kaplan was the assistant pitching coach for the Philadelphia Phillies alongside Caleb Cotham, and he did an insane job. Like, we know Caleb Cotham's name as the pitching coach of this team, but what some people might know is Brian Kaplan, well, once he took a job with the Phillies in 2022, you look at a situation where he worked in tandem with Caleb Cotham. He talked to free agents. He worked with development. And another thing that's really important is Kaplan was a big mentor for Andrew Painter. And I don't think this is going to be a situation where it's like, oh, the Phillies let one of Andrew Painter's biggest mentors walk. Why would they ever do? Like, the dude got hired as the pitching coach for the Arizona Diamondbacks. So he got an opportunity to be the guy somewhere else with a solid organization out there in Arizona. You can't fault him, and I'm sure Andrew Painter doesn't fault him for walking away. Nobody faults him for taking that job. It's a progression of his career. But now the Philadelphia Phillies are missing a hole in their coaching staff where they felt really good about what Brian Kaplan has been able to do. And I'm reading from Matt Gelb article here on The Athletic for some of this information. So credit to Matt Gelb and the great work he continues to do in the offseason. But the Phillies credit Brian Kaplan with a lot of stuff like advancements in biomechanics and changes to how pitchers develop in the Philadelphia Phillies organization. That to me says a lot about finding these diamond in the rough guys that the Phillies have, well, they've really made a name for themselves around baseball doing it. Hoffman, Strahm, Kerkering, Jose Ruiz, who we still have to evaluate. These guys is just like, well, either they hadn't had as much success other places, or they're coming out of nowhere as young pitchers, or they're kind of no-name guys that haven't had success before but have been around a little bit. Bottom line is Brian Kaplan and Caleb Cotham worked hand in hand on a lot of stuff. And if you're going to give Caleb Cotham credit, like I did in our latest episode, you got to give Brian Kaplan credit as well. So I'm sure the Philadelphia Phillies have good options to bring up from within. Their minor league system has actually been really darn good at developing talent. So you can bring someone there. You can like move up. Like there's a specific bullpen coach that you may elevate to assistant pitching coach. And ultimately, if Caleb Cotham is as good of a pitching coach as we believe him to be, he's still the guy that runs stuff, right? This is the equivalent of an offensive-minded head coach who calls the plays for a football team. Like, this is the best way I can think of an analogy. But, like, think about an offensive-minded football coach, a head coach, and they lose their offensive coordinator. But it's like you still have the system. You still were the guy calling plays. They helped you implement everything. They helped you teach it. They were a big part of the operation. But the head of the snake is still there, and that's Caleb Cotham. So I don't expect the Phillies to take, like, a major step back because of this. But there are now some duties that kind of sit out in the ether that need to be filled. So that's the part from the current Phillies perspective of like, okay, how do we go about replacing this guy to make sure our organization runs smoothly and continues to do what we've done over the past couple of years, which is put together a darn good starting rotation and a darn good bullpen. Like the Phillies have done that over the past couple of seasons, and it's an important part of their success. But I also do want to take the time, since he's leaving the organization and he helped the Phillies in 22, when they made that run to the World Series, in 23, in the NLCS appearance, in 24, a division title and 95 wins. I mean, Brian Kaplan is an unheralded guy that did a lot for this organization. It sucks to see him go. Believe it or not, this is the first time a coach has been hired out of the Philadelphia Phillies major league staff in 5 years, which kind of tracks when you consider they were in a 10-year playoff drought. But then also when you think, oh, well, they went to the World Series in 2022 and nobody got poached. Well, they were a team. They were the final wild card team. 2023, they win over 90 games, and they go ahead and make it in. They make it to the NLCS again. You think people would start looking. But now you have your first poaching of a Philadelphia Phillies coaching staff member to go to another organization. What exactly does that mean, right? And credit to Brian Kaplan. He deserves credit in the world, all the credit in the world for what he did with the Phillies. Did a great job here with this organization. So sad to see him go. If you don't know the name, now you do, and now you know why he was so important. He deserves that credit for the job that he's done alongside Caleb Cotham. But what does that act of like Phillies assistants now being poached mean? Well, teams have fully taken notice of the Philadelphia Phillies, as they probably should have a year ago, but they're also looking at this organization saying, well, they're doing things the right way. It's a good thing for the Philadelphia Phillies organization that they've got their house in order to the point where other teams want to acquire guys that work in the city for this team. But it also means that, let's say Kaplan goes and has success in Arizona. Then you're going to have other teams knocking on the door saying, who's your assistant hitting coach? Who's your catching coach? Who's this guy? Who's that guy? And they're going to look to give them elevated positions. And the Phillies, well, they gave Rob Thompson an extension. Caleb Cotham is not going anywhere. Kevin Long, as much as people might want Kevin Long fired, he's going to be here this next year too. So there's not a spot for advancement right now. So you may see more poaching of Philadelphia Phillies assistants, maybe not this offseason, but in off seasons to come. And that makes it tougher and tougher to remain at the top. Sports have this weird ecology, this ecosystem of like when you're a great team, the league finds a way to naturally knock you back down and bring you back to the pack by signing players you can't afford, poaching coaches you can't elevate. And this is the start of that for the Philadelphia Phillies. So a reminder that it's hard work to stay this competitive, but also a credit to the job that Kaplan has done and wishing him maybe not all the best in Arizona, considering they're another National League team and a team that knocked you out of the postseason 2 years ago. But as much success that doesn't hurt the Phillies out there in the desert with the Arizona Diamondbacks. That's all for today's episode of Locked On Phillies. Thank you so much for joining us today. Once again, we're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Please make sure you're rating and reviewing in podcast form if you're listening. Subscribe to the YouTube. Hit that subscribe button. It's free. It's easy. It really helps me out. It gets you notifications when new episodes are posted. And that's about it right there. So we will talk to you tomorrow as we continue our bullpen evaluations and keep you updated on any big news around the Philadelphia Phillies as far as the offseason is going on our next episode of Locked On Phillies.